The silence in Federal Courtroom 4B was heavy, suffocating, and tasted like fear. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. On one side sat Sergeant Rick Gower, a man who had worn his badge like a crown for 20 years, smirking as if this were a minor traffic dispute. On the other sat Lieutenant Commander Terrell Bishop, a shadow in a pristine dress blue uniform, his chest a wall of ribbons that screamed hero to everyone but the man who put him in handcuffs. But when the back door swung open and the heavy rhythmic thud of polished boots filled the room, Gower's smirk vanished. The Pentagon hadn't just sent a lawyer, they had sent a hammer, and it was about to fall. The air conditioning in the courthouse hummed, a low drone fighting a losing battle against the stifling tension in the room. Judge Theodore Haskins, a man with a face carved from granite and patience worn thin by 3 decades on the bench, peered over his spectacles. He tapped his gavel once, a sharp crack that snapped the gallery to attention. "The prosecution may call its first witness," Haskins rumbled. District Attorney Clifford Banks stood up. He was a nervous man, sweating through his cheap grey suit. He knew this case was a poisoned chalice. He cleared his throat. "The state calls Sergeant Rick Gower to the stand." Rick Gower stood up from the defense table. He was a large man, thick-necked and barrel-chested, the kind of officer who took up the whole doorway when he entered a room. He walked to the witness stand with a swagger that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. He adjusted his tie, sat down, and placed a hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth, but his eyes, cold, blue, and arrogant, told a different story. "Sergeant Gower," Banks began, trying to sound authoritative, "walk us through the events of November 14th. Gower leaned into the microphone. "It was a routine patrol. I was stationed near the Shell station off Highway 17. Bad area. Lots of drug traffic. Around 2300 hours I saw a vehicle, a matte black Ford F-150, parked at Pump 4. The driver was loitering." "Loitering?" Banks asked. "He was standing outside the vehicle, pacing, looking agitated," Gower said, glancing toward the defense table where Tyrell Bishop sat. Bishop didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his posture rigid, his Navy Service dress blue uniform immaculate. The gold stripes on his sleeves, the insignia of a lieutenant commander, caught the courtroom lights. He looked like a statue cast in iron. "I approached the suspect to perform a welfare check," Gower continued. "I asked for ID. The suspect was non-compliant. He started reaching for something in his jacket. I feared for my safety, so I neutralized the threat." "Neutralized?" Banks pressed. "I deployed my taser and effected an arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer." From the back of the room, a low murmur rippled through the gallery. The video of the arrest had not been released to the public yet, but rumors were swirling. The story Gower was telling sounded standard, the kind of police report that gets filed and forgotten 1,000 times a day. But this wasn't a standard case. "Thank you, Sergeant," Banks said, sitting down quickly. He wanted Gower off the stand. He knew what was coming. Bishop's lawyer stood up. He wasn't a public defender. He wasn't a high-priced local attorney. He was Captain Elias Thorne of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, a man with sharp features and eyes like flint. He walked toward the witness stand, holding a file folder as if it were a weapon. "Sergeant Gower," Thorne said, his voice smooth, dangerous. "You stated the suspect was loitering at a gas station. Is it illegal to pump gas in the state of Virginia?" "No," Gower grunted. "You stated he was agitated. Can you describe that behavior?" "He was pacing, looking around." "Was he looking around, Sergeant, or was he scanning his perimeter?" Gower scoffed. "Same difference. He looked suspicious." "Suspicious," Thorne repeated. He opened the folder. "Let's talk about the suspect's attire." What was Mr. Bishop wearing that night? Gower shrugged. Some costume, looked like a suit. Thorne stopped. The silence in the room deepened. A costume? Yeah, a fancy get-up. Gold stripes. Medals. Figured he was coming from a party or something. Stolen valor, maybe. Guys like him like to play dress-up. The gallery gasped. Judge Haskins's eyes narrowed. Thorne didn't flinch. He let the insult hang in the air, letting the jury breathe it in. Guys like him, Thorne repeated softly. Sergeant Gower, when you approached Lieutenant Commander Bishop, did you identify yourself? I yelled, "Police!" And what did he do? He turned around and started talking back, asking why I was bothering him. Did he identify himself? He mumbled something about being an officer. I told him to shut up and get on the ground. You told a commissioned officer of the United States Navy, wearing his full service dress blues, to shut up and get on the ground. I told a suspect to get on the ground. I don't care what he's wearing. The law is the law. Thorne smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. The law is indeed the law, Sergeant, and on the night of November 14th, you didn't just break the law. You declared war on the wrong institution. Thorne turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to enter Exhibit A into evidence. The body cam footage from Sergeant Gower's vest. The footage that the chaotic glitch in the station's server miraculously failed to delete, thanks to a backup cloud sync the sergeant wasn't aware of. Gower's face went pale. The smirk died. Play it, Judge Haskins ordered. The large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The timestamp read 23 of 10. The audio crackled with the sound of wind and the hum of the highway. On the screen, the view was shaky, moving with Gower's stride. It showed a well-lit gas station. Standing at the pump was Tyrell Bishop. He wasn't pacing. He was standing at parade rest, waiting for the tank to fill, checking his watch. He looked immaculate, even in the grainy footage. Hey! Gower's voice boomed from the speakers. On screen, Bishop turned slowly. His movements were controlled, fluid. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. Is there a problem, officer? Bishop's voice was calm, deep. Get your hands where I can see them, Gower screamed, his hand already on his holster. My hands are visible, Bishop said. He raised them slowly to chest height, palms open. I am Lieutenant Commander Tyrell Bishop, United States Navy. I am traveling to— I don't give a damn who you are, Gower shouted, closing the distance. Turn around, spread 'em. Officer, I have done nothing wrong. I am fueling my vehicle. You're resisting. I am not resisting. I am asking for the probable cause for this detainment. In the courtroom, the jury watched, mesmerized. The contrast was stark. The thug Gower had described was calm, articulate, and disciplined. The hero officer was erratic, aggressive, and profane. On the screen, Gower lunged. He grabbed Bishop by the shoulder of his uniform. Bishop didn't strike back. He didn't flinch. He simply planted his feet. Do not touch me, Bishop said, his voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a threat. It was an order, the kind of order given by men who command warships. You think you're tough, huh? You think that costume scares me? Gower sneered on the video. He pulled his taser. It is not a costume, Bishop said calmly, and you are making a mistake that will cost you your career. Pop hiss. The taser wires shot out. They hit Bishop in the chest, snagging on the thick fabric of his dress coat and the ribbons. In the courtroom, everyone held their breath. On the video, Bishop didn't fall. He stumbled back a step, gritting his teeth as the electricity surged. He ripped the probes out of his uniform with a sharp jerk of his hand. Gower panicked. He dropped the taser and drew his service pistol. Get on the ground or I will kill you. Bishop froze. He looked at the gun, then at Gower's shaking hands. Slowly, with agonizing dignity, Bishop knelt on the dirty concrete. He placed his hands behind his head. "I am complying," Bishop said. "But remember this moment, Sergeant. You are not arresting a man. You are arresting a trident." Gower rushed in, kneeing Bishop in the back, slamming his face into the pavement. The camera shook violently. "Shut up! Shut up!" Gower was screaming, cuffing him. He yanked Bishop up by the arms, nearly dislocating his shoulders. He dragged him toward the cruiser. The video cut to black. The courtroom was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Captain Thorne turned off the monitor. He looked at Gower, who was now sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Sergeant Gower," Thorne said softly, "you testified that he was reaching for a weapon. The video shows his hands were in the air." From my angle, it looked like," Gower stammered. "You testified he was aggressive. The video shows he was the only calm person in the encounter. He was verbal. He was challenging my authority. He was asserting his rights, and you didn't like it." Thorne walked back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. "Tell me, Sergeant, do you know what a trident is?" "A fork?" Gower quipped weakly. A few people in the back laughed nervously. "No," Thorne said, his voice turning to steel. "The trident is the special warfare insignia worn by U.S. Navy SEALs. Lieutenant Commander Bishop isn't just an officer. He is a Tier 1 operator. He is deployed to combat zones you can't even find on a map. He has saved more American lives than you have written traffic tickets." Thorne leaned in over the witness railing. "And do you know what happens when you kidnap a high-ranking asset of the United States military, assault him, and detain him without cause?" Gower swallowed hard. "I didn't kidnap nobody. I arrested a perp." "No, Sergeant," Thorne said. "You intercepted a federal operation. Lieutenant Commander Bishop wasn't just getting gas. He was in transit to a classified briefing at Dam Neck. His timeline was critical. By arresting him, you didn't just inconvenience him. You compromised national security." "Objection!" Banks shouted, standing up. "Calls for speculation. This is a simple resisting arrest case." "Overruled," Judge Haskins barked. He looked at Thorne with intense interest. "Counsel, are you suggesting the federal government has an interest in this traffic stop?" Thorne turned to the back of the room. He pointed to the double doors. "I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm proving it." The doors swung open. 3 men walked in. They weren't bailiffs. They weren't local cops. They wore dark suits, earpieces, and the distinct, terrifying aura of men who answered only to the president. Leading them was a woman in a Navy service dress white uniform, with 2 stars on her collar. Rear Admiral Hayes. The entire courtroom stood up. Even Judge Haskins straightened his robe. Admiral Hayes walked past the bar, past the stunned prosecutor, past the trembling Sergeant Gower, and stopped in front of the judge. "Admiral," Judge Haskins said, his voice respectful. "To what do we owe this honor?" "Your Honor," Hayes said, her voice crisp and clear, "I am here on behalf of the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense. We are invoking the Supremacy Clause." She turned to look at Gower. The look she gave him could have frozen the sun. "And we are taking jurisdiction of this prisoner," she pointed at Bishop. "And this defendant," she pointed at Gower. Gower blinked. "Me? I'm the witness." "Not anymore, Sergeant," Hayes said. "You are now a suspect in a federal investigation regarding the sabotage of a military operation and the violation of the civil rights of a service member under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Federal Law." She signaled to the men in suits. They moved toward the witness stand. "Get your hands off me!" Gower shouted, standing up. "I'm a police officer. You can't touch me." One of the agents, a man with a scar running down his cheek, didn't even slow down. He grabbed Gower's wrist, spun him around, and slammed him against the witness stand wall, mirroring exactly what Gower had done to Bishop at the gas station. "Federal agents!" the man shouted. "You are under arrest!" "On what charge?" Gower screamed, his face pressed against the wood. Bishop, still sitting at the defense table, finally spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He just looked at Gower with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity. "Article 97, Bishop said quietly. "Unlawful detention," and about a dozen others. As Gower was dragged out of the courtroom, kicking and screaming, the reality of the situation crashed down on everyone present. This wasn't a traffic ticket anymore. This was a war, and Sergeant Gower had just become the first casualty. Rick Gower was used to interrogation rooms. He was used to being the one standing, drinking stale coffee, looming over a suspect handcuffed to a metal table. He knew all the tricks, the bad cop routine, the false empathy, the slamming of the fist. But he had never been the one in the chair. He sat in a small, windowless room inside a federal building in Norfolk. The table was bolted to the floor. The chair was cold steel. The handcuffs were tight, tighter than regulation, he noted bitterly. The door buzzed and opened. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Captain Elias Thorne, the JAG lawyer, and the scarred agent from the courtroom, Agent Miller. Miller carried a thick stack of files. Thorne carried nothing but a look of absolute disdain. "I want my union rep," Gower spat, trying to summon some of his old bravado. "And I want to know why I'm being held without bail." Miller pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. He placed the files on the table. "You aren't in county lockup, Rick. You're in federal custody. The Patriot Act has some interesting clauses when it comes to interfering with national security assets. We can hold you until the sun burns out if we feel like it." "National security?" Gower laughed, a nervous barking sound. "He was at a gas station. I stopped a guy acting suspicious. If he was on a secret mission, maybe he shouldn't have been standing around eating a Snickers bar." Thorne leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "That's the part you don't get, Sergeant. You think you just hassled a black man in a nice car. You think it's just another qualified immunity case where you get a paid vacation and a slap on the wrist." Thorne pointed to the mirror on the wall. Lieutenant Commander Bishop wasn't at that gas station for snacks. He was part of Operation Silent Watch. He was tracking a domestic terror cell moving stolen C4 explosives through the I-95 corridor. Gower's face went slack. "What?" "The black F-150, Miller continued, opening a file. "It's a specially outfitted surveillance unit. It has long-range listening devices, thermal imaging, and a direct uplink to the Pentagon. When you pulled him over, Bishop was monitoring a handoff happening behind the gas station. A handoff involving 3 men selling military-grade plastic explosives." Miller slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy surveillance shot taken from Bishop's truck before Gower arrived. It showed 3 men transferring crates into a van. "Because you decided to play super cop and create a scene," Miller said, his voice dropping to a growl. "The targets got spooked. They saw the lights. They saw the commotion. They slipped away while you were busy tasing a decorated war hero." I didn't know," Gower stammered. "How could I know?" "You didn't know because you didn't check," Thorne cut in. "You didn't run his plates. If you had, you would have gotten a do not interdict flag. You didn't listen when he identified himself. You saw a target, not a person. And because of your bias, 3 terrorists are now in the wind with enough C4 to level a city block." Gower slumped in his chair. The gravity of it was sinking in. "So, I made a mistake. A bad mistake. But you can't put me away for a mistake. I have a clean record." Miller smiled. It was the scariest thing Gower had ever seen. "A clean record?" Miller tapped the stack of files. "Rick, when the Pentagon steps in, we don't just look at the incident. We look at the man. We pulled your entire history, every body cam video, every arrest report, every complaint your union buried." Miller opened the first file. "November 2019. You broke a college student's jaw during a traffic stop. The dash cam malfunctioned, but the audio didn't." He opened another. "July 2021. You confiscated $5,000 in cash from a contractor during a stop. You logged $2,000 into evidence. Where did the other 3 go, Rick?" Gower was sweating profusely now. That's ancient history, unsubstantiated." "To the local DA, maybe," Thorne said. "But we aren't the local DA. We are auditing your entire precinct. And here is the kicker, Rick, the twist you didn't see coming." Thorne leaned in close. "The terrorists Bishop was tracking? We caught one of them an hour ago. He's talking. And do you know what he said?" Gower stared, his mouth dry. "He said they chose that gas station because they paid for protection," Thorne whispered. "They were paying a local cop to keep the heat off them during the transfer, to distract any patrols, to make sure no one looked behind the building." Thorne's eyes bored into Gower's. "We checked your bank records, Rick. We found the offshore crypto account. You weren't arresting Bishop because he was suspicious. You were arresting him because he was watching your friends." The room spun. Gower felt the bile rise in his throat. "That's a lie!" Gower screamed, standing up, rattling the chains. "I'm not a traitor!" "Sit down!" Miller roared, slamming his hand on the table. "You're going to be charged with treason, Rick," Thorne said calmly. "Aid and comfort to the enemy, kidnapping a federal officer, corruption, racketeering, and deprivation of rights under color of law." Thorne checked his watch. "The trial starts in 3 weeks. Better get comfortable. You're not going home." The arrest of Sergeant Rick Gower was the first domino. When it fell, it didn't just make a sound. It shattered the floorboards of the entire localized justice system. News of the arrest hit the national cycle like a meteor. The video of Bishop, calm and stoic while being brutalized, was played on every screen from Times Square to Tokyo. Free Bishop had trended for a day until the Navy released a statement saying Bishop was already free and that he was pressing charges. But the real story was happening quietly in the dark corners of the precinct where Gower had worked for 20 years. Admiral Hayes wasn't satisfied with just Gower. She knew that a man like him didn't operate in a vacuum. You don't take bribes from domestic terrorists without a support network. She set up a temporary command center in the federal building. On the wall was a hierarchy chart of the local police department. At the top was Chief Mulligan, a man known for his charm and his uncanny ability to make misconduct complaints disappear. "What do we have on the chief?" Hayes asked, sipping black coffee. Agent Miller was typing furiously on a laptop. "We traced the crypto wallet Gower was using. It wasn't a solo account. It was a sub-wallet. The main node funnels payments to 3 other accounts. Names? One is anonymous. The other 2 trace back to shell companies registered to Chief Mulligan's brother-in-law." Hayes's eyes narrowed. They were running a protection racket. The whole department. "Not the whole department, ma'am," Miller said, "but the shift commanders. They specialized in the Highway 17 corridor. They targeted out-of-state drivers for asset forfeiture to pad their budgets, and they took payments from traffickers to look the other way during scheduled windows." And Bishop drove right into the middle of a scheduled window, Hayes realized. Gower attacked him because Bishop was the only variable they couldn't control. "Exactly," Miller said. "Gower wasn't just being a racist bully, though he is one. He was panic-cleaning the scene. He needed Bishop gone before the transaction behind the gas station concluded." Just then, the phone rang. It was the DA, Clifford Banks, the same sweating man from the courtroom. "Admiral," Banks sounded breathless. I have a problem." "You have many problems, Mr. Banks," Hayes said coldly. "Which one is bothering you today?" "Chief Mulligan. He's in my office. He's demanding we drop the charges against Gower. He says if we don't, he's going to release compromising material on the mayor." Hayes smiled. It was a predatory smile. "He's trying to blackmail his way out of a treason charge?" "He doesn't know about the treason charge yet," Banks squeaked. "He thinks it's just the assault. He thinks he can bully us like usual." "Keep him there," Hayes ordered. "Don't let him leave. Tell him I'm coming to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Banks asked, confused. "You don't negotiate with these people." "I'm not going to negotiate a plea deal, Mr. Banks," Hayes said, putting on her cover hat. "I'm going to negotiate the terms of his surrender." Hayes motioned to Miller and 2 Marine MPs standing guard by the door. "Load up, we're going to the district attorney's office, and bring the federal warrants, all of them." Chief Mulligan was pacing the floor, his face red. He was a man used to being the biggest dog in the yard. "I run this town, Cliff," Mulligan shouted at the terrified DA. "You think some Navy boy and a few feds are going to dismantle my precinct? I have dirt on everyone. Everyone!" The door to the office didn't open. It was kicked open. 2 Marines in full tactical gear stepped in, weapons at the low ready. Mulligan froze. Admiral Hayes walked in behind them, flanked by Agent Miller. She looked at Mulligan with the kind of disdain usually reserved for gum on the bottom of a shoe. "Chief Mulligan," Hayes said smoothly. "Who do you think you are?" Mulligan blustered, trying to puff out his chest. "You can't bring military personnel in here. This is a civilian office. Posse Comitatus Act." "Actually," Hayes interrupted, "the Posse Comitatus Act has exceptions for cases involving nuclear materials or large-scale domestic terrorism. And since your boys were protecting a shipment of C4 destined for a federal building, the rules have changed." Mulligan's color drained away. "C4? I don't know anything about C4. It was just supposed to be cigarettes and knock-off purses." The room went silent. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Did you just confess to a felony conspiracy on record, Chief?" Agent Miller held up a small recording device. "Crystal clear." Mulligan realized his mistake. He lunged for the door, panic taking over. "I'm not going down for this." He didn't make it 2 steps. Agent Miller swept his leg, sending the chief crashing into the DA's mahogany desk. Before Mulligan could scramble up, he was pinned, cuffs clicking onto his wrists. "Chief Mulligan," Hayes said, looking down at him, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." She turned to the DA. "Mr. Banks, I suggest you start drafting the indictments, and I want the names of every officer who was on Gower's shift that night." The cleanup had begun. But the trial was going to be the main event, and Rick Gower was about to find out that the blue wall of silence crumbles fast when the Pentagon brings a sledgehammer. The federal trial of United States vs. Richard Gower didn't begin with a bang. It began with the slow, grinding suffocation of a man who realized he was alone. 3 months had passed since the arrest. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Press, military personnel in dress uniforms showing solidarity with Bishop and civil rights activists. Gower sat at the defense table. He looked smaller now. The jail uniform hung loosely on his frame. His skin was pasty, deprived of sunlight. Gone was the swaggering sergeant who had smirked at the judge. In his place was a desperate animal caught in a trap. His lawyer, a court-appointed federal defender named Sophia Jenkins, looked exhausted. She knew she was fighting a losing battle. Her strategy was simple: paint Gower as a pawn, a low-level grunt who was following orders and had no knowledge of the explosives or the terrorism angle. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jenkins began her opening statement, her voice trembling slightly. "Rick Gower is not a terrorist. He is a police officer who made a judgment call. A bad call, perhaps. A biased call. Yes. But he did not know what was in that truck. He did not know about the conspiracy. He is being scapegoated by a corrupt department trying to save its own skin." It was a decent defense until the prosecution stood up. Captain Elias Thorne, the JAG officer, was now sitting second chair to the lead federal prosecutor, a shark of a woman named Elena Rodriguez. Note, using a new name as requested. Rodriguez didn't walk. She stalked. "The defense claims ignorance," Rodriguez said, engaging the jury with fierce eye contact. "They claim Sergeant Gower was just a bad apple. But we will show you that he wasn't just a bad apple. He was the gatekeeper. He was the paid sentry for a criminal enterprise that sold out American safety for cryptocurrency." The turning point came on the third day. The prosecution called their surprise witness. It wasn't Bishop. It was former Chief Mulligan. Gower's head snapped up. Mulligan walked in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the ankles. He had taken a plea deal, 15 years in exchange for testimony against the rogue elements of his force. Mulligan sat in the witness box, refusing to look at Gower. "Mr. Mulligan," Rodriguez asked, "did you order Sergeant Gower to arrest Lieutenant Commander Bishop?" "No," Mulligan lied smoothly. "My standing orders were to patrol the area. I had no idea Gower was taking payments directly from the cartel. I was shocked when I found out." Gower's face turned crimson. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You liar! You set the schedule. You told me to clear the lot." "Order," Judge Haskins shouted, banging his gavel. "Defendant will sit down or be bound." "He's lying!" Gower screamed, spit flying from his lips. "He took the biggest cut. He told me, if anyone sniffs around the pumps, bury them. That's what he said." Sophia Jenkins pulled Gower down, whispering furiously in his ear. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Gower's rage. They had seen the dynamic. It wasn't a rogue cop. It was a den of vipers turning on each other. Then Tyrell Bishop took the stand. The courtroom quieted. Bishop wore a grey suit, a small American flag pin on his lapel. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a judge in his own right. Jenkins, the defense attorney, tried to rattle him during cross-examination. She wanted to prove that Bishop had provoked Gower to escalate the charges. "Mr. Bishop," Jenkins said, "you are a trained SEAL. You know hand-to-hand combat. You know how to de-escalate. Why didn't you just show your ID immediately? Why did you argue?" Bishop leaned forward. "Ma'am, I identified myself 3 times. I stated my rank. I stated my intent." "But you didn't get on the ground immediately," Jenkins pressed. "You challenged his authority. As a military man, don't you respect the chain of command?" Bishop's eyes hardened. "I respect lawful orders. I do not respect unlawful aggression. If I had reached for my wallet faster, he would have shot me. If I had moved slower, he would have tased me. The outcome was decided the moment he saw me. My actions were irrelevant." "You seem very calm about all this," Jenkins said, trying to paint him as cold. "You were assaulted, yet you show no emotion. Is it possible you engineered this encounter to expose the department?" Bishop paused. He looked at Gower. "I have spent 20 years fighting enemies of this country," Bishop said, his voice low and powerful. "I have lost friends in deserts and mountains. I have seen true evil. Sergeant Gower isn't evil. He is something worse. He is a bully with a badge who betrayed the very citizens he swore to protect. I didn't engineer this. He did. I just survived it. The prosecution played the final piece of evidence. It was a recovered text message thread from Gower's seized phone, time-stamped 10 minutes before the arrest. Incoming message. Unknown number. Package arriving 23:30. Clear the lot. No witnesses. Gower's reply. Copy. I see a stray at pump 4. I'll take him out of play. Incoming message. Make it stick. We need 30 minutes. Gower's reply. He won't be a problem. I'll ruin his night. The courtroom gasped. The stray was Bishop. Gower hadn't just reacted poorly. He had premeditated the arrest to facilitate a terror transaction. Gower put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the air in the courtroom was electric. Gower stood up, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean on the table. Mr. Foreman, Judge Haskins said, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Publish the verdict. The foreman, a retired school teacher with stern glasses, read from the sheet. On count 1, kidnapping of a federal officer. Guilty. On count 2, conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Guilty. On count 3, deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty. On count 4, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Guilty. The list went on. Guilty. 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 18 counts in total. Gower sobbed. It was a pathetic, heaving sound. Judge Haskins didn't wait for a sentencing hearing. He had the guidelines ready. He looked at Gower over his spectacles with a look of utter disgust. Sergeant Gower, Haskins began, his voice booming without a microphone. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen murderers, rapists, and thieves, but I have rarely seen a man so thoroughly disgrace the uniform he wears. You didn't just hurt a man, Haskins continued. You attacked a United States naval officer. You compromised a national security operation. And you did it for greed. You sold your badge for a few $1,000s of cryptocurrency. You acted as a mercenary for terrorists, hiding behind the shield of law enforcement. You are a danger to this country and a stain on the justice system. Haskins picked up his pen. For the charges related to the terrorism conspiracy, I sentence you to 25 years. Gower's knees buckled. For the charges related to the kidnapping and assault, I sentence you to 20 years. Gower let out a moan. For the civil rights violations and corruption, I sentence you to 13 years. These sentences are to run consecutively. Haskins slammed the gavel down. That is a total of 58 years in a federal penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole until you are 96 years old. Get him out of my sight. The bailiffs moved in. They didn't treat him like a cop anymore. They treated him like a convict. They cuffed his hands behind his back and shackled his feet. As Gower was shuffled out of the courtroom, he looked toward the gallery, searching for one sympathetic face. He saw his wife, but she turned her head away, tears streaming down her face. She had already filed for divorce. He looked at the other officers in the room. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at the floor, ashamed to be associated with him. Then he looked at Tyrell Bishop. Bishop stood tall, his Navy service dress blues pristine. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply nodded, a single, sharp dip of the chin. It was the final dismissal. You are nothing, the nod said. You are gone. Gower was dragged through the side door, the heavy wood closing with a final thud that echoed like a coffin lid slamming shut. Outside the courthouse, the press was in a frenzy. But inside, there was a strange stillness. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with the force of a tidal wave. Captain Thorne walked over to Bishop. It's done, Tyrell. Bishop adjusted his cover. Not yet, Elias. Gower was the muscle. Mulligan was the middleman. But someone was buying that C4. The mission isn't over. Thorne smiled. Always on duty, huh? The only easy day was yesterday, Bishop said, quoting the SEAL ethos. He turned and walked out of the courtroom into the bright Virginia sunlight, a free man, while Rick Gower began his first day of 58 years in the dark. The legal system moves with a glacial, grinding inevitability once the gears of the Pentagon are engaged. For Rick Gower, the transition from the king of Highway 17 to inmate -8214054 was a violent psychological whiplash. The courtroom victory for Terrell Bishop was just the beginning of Gower's descent. The real story of his karma lies in the cold, clinical reality of federal imprisonment and the total erasure of the life he had built on a foundation of lies. The morning of his transfer to a high-security federal penitentiary was grey and biting. Gower sat in the back of a reinforced transport van, his wrists and ankles connected by a heavy belly chain that rattled with every bump in the road. He looked out the small barred window at the Virginia landscape he once patrolled with an iron fist. He saw a local police cruiser parked on the shoulder of the highway, its lights flashing as it conducted a routine stop. For a split second, Gower felt a surge of muscle memory. He wanted to reach for his radio, to bark orders, to exert authority. Then, the chain bit into his skin, reminding him that he was no longer the hunter. He was the catch. When the van reached the gates of the United States Penitentiary, the reception was not what he expected. There were no brothers in blue waiting to offer a sympathetic nod. There was only the grey wall. Federal corrections officers have a particular brand of disdain for dirty cops. To them, Gower wasn't a peer. He was a liability and a disgrace. "Strip," the processing officer commanded. He was a man half Gower's age, but with eyes that had seen far more suffering. "I was a sergeant for 20 years, Gower started, his voice cracking. "I know the protocol." "You were a sergeant," the officer replied, not looking up from his clipboard. "Now you're a body. Move!" Gower stood shivering in the cold intake room, stripped of his dignity, his jewelry, and the last remnants of his pride. They issued him a rough, orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and old sweat. They took his fingerprints, the same prints that were on thousands of arrest reports, and digitized them into a database of the damned. Because of his former status as a police officer, Gower could not be placed in the general population immediately. The risk of him being murdered by men he had previously arrested was too high. He was placed in administrative segregation, the hole. In a cell the size of a parking space, Gower faced the first real enemy he couldn't bully: silence. The room consisted of a concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet with no seat, and a single fluorescent light that stayed on 24 hours a day, humming at a frequency that felt like a needle in his brain. He spent the first 72 hours pacing, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. He replayed the gas station encounter 1,000,000 times. In his mind, he tried to change the outcome. What if I hadn't tased him? What if I had checked the plates? What if I had just let him go? But every time the mental film ran, it ended the same way. With the click of Bishop's handcuffs and the cold, unyielding gaze of a man who knew he was being wronged. Gower began to hallucinate. He saw the ribbons on Bishop's chest glowing in the dark of his cell. He heard Admiral Hayes's voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You are now a suspect in a federal investigation regarding the sabotage of a military operation." The weight of the word treason sat on his chest like an anvil. 2 weeks into his stay in the hole, Gower was brought to a small room for a legal meeting. He hoped it was Sophia Jenkins, with news of an appeal. Instead, he found a man in a sharp suit from the Department of Justice's Asset Forfeiture Division. "What is this?" Gower asked, sitting heavily in the bolted-down chair. "This is the notification of seizure," the official said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO Act, and the Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act, the United States government is seizing all assets derived from or facilitated by your criminal enterprise." "I have a house," Gower shouted. "My wife lives there. My kids." "The house was purchased in 2018, the official noted coldly, "the same year you began receiving protection payments from the local smuggling ring. We've traced the down payment to a shell account. The house is gone. The vehicles are gone. Your pension from the police department has been garnished to pay for the costs of the federal investigation and the damages to Lieutenant Commander Bishop's equipment." Gower felt the blood drain from his face. "You're leaving my family on the street?" "Your wife has already vacated the premises, Mr. Gower. She signed the papers 3 days ago. Along with her petition for divorce, she's reverted to her maiden name. Your children, well, they've been told you're away on a long assignment. I doubt they'll be visiting." This was the hard karma. It wasn't just the prison bars. It was the total liquidation of his existence. He had spent 20 years clearing the lot for criminals, and now his own life had been cleared. He was a man with no home, no family, and no legacy. 1 month later, Gower was moved to a protective custody wing. He was allowed 1 visitor. He expected no one. When the guard led him to the visiting booth, he saw a man sitting behind the thick, scratched plexiglass. It was Tyrell Bishop. Bishop wasn't in uniform this time. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, but the intensity of his presence was undiminished. He looked at Gower, not with anger, but with a profound, quiet pity. Gower picked up the telephone handset. His hand was shaking. "Come to gloat? Come to see the stray in the cage?" Bishop looked at him for a long moment before picking up his own phone. "No, Rick, I didn't come to gloat. I came to provide a report. You were a sergeant. You know how important it is to close the file." "The file is closed," Gower spat. "I'm doing 58 years. You won." "You still don't get it," Bishop said, his voice calm and steady. "This was never about winning. You were a variable in a much larger operation. I told you that night at the gas station that you were making a mistake. You thought I was talking about my rank. I wasn't. I was talking about the mission." Bishop leaned in closer to the glass. "The 3 men in that van behind the Shell station, the ones you were protecting, we didn't just catch them. Because of the bad arrest you made, their leader panicked. He thought the police were actually doing their jobs for once. He started making calls on unencrypted lines. He led us straight to the warehouse in Chesapeake." Bishop let that sink in. "We recovered 40 pounds of C4 and 6 surface-to-air missiles. They were planning to hit the naval base during a change of command ceremony. Thousands of people would have died. My friends, my sailors, your fellow citizens." Gower's eyes widened. He had known the money was for protection, but he had convinced himself it was just drugs or contraband. He had told himself it was victimless. "You didn't just take a bribe, Rick," Bishop continued. "You paved the way for a massacre. The only reason those people are alive today is because your ego was so big that you couldn't help but cause a scene. Your desire to humiliate me drew enough attention to spook the cell and force them into the open. In a perverse way, your corruption saved those lives. But it doesn't change what you are." "And what am I?" Gower whispered. "You're the man who tried to arrest the tide," Bishop said. "You saw a black man in a nice truck, and you thought you knew his story. You thought your badge gave you the right to write his ending. But you forgot that the law isn't yours. It belongs to the people. I'm going back to my command tomorrow. I have a new deployment. I'll be under the stars doing the work." Bishop stood up and placed his hand against the glass. "You'll be here, in this room, in that suit, for the rest of your life. Every time you close your eyes, I want you to remember the sound of that taser, because that was the sound of your life ending. I've forgiven you, Rick, but the United States of America? We don't forget." Bishop hung up the phone and walked out without looking back. The years began to blend into a grey soup of monotony. Gower's hair went white within the first 5 years. He became a ghost in the prison system, a man who spoke to no one and whom no one spoke to. He spent his time in the prison library, not reading law books to help his appeal, but reading history. He read about the wars Bishop had fought in. He read about the honors the Navy had bestowed upon the man he had tried to ruin. He saw a clipping in a smuggled newspaper once. Rear Admiral Tyrrell Bishop awarded Distinguished Service Medal. There was a photo of Bishop standing next to the president. He looked exactly the same, stoic, iron-willed, and just. Gower looked at his own reflection in the stainless steel mirror of his cell. He saw a hollowed-out version of a man who had once thought he was a god. He realized then that the 58 years wasn't just a number. It was a mirror. It was the universe reflecting back the 58 years of service he had discarded the moment he took his first bribe. The real karma wasn't the prison. It was the fact that Tyrrell Bishop would never think of Rick Gower again. Bishop would go on to lead, to save, and to be remembered. Gower would die in a concrete box, his name a footnote in a JAG report, his badge melted down and recycled into something useful. As the lights hummed in his cell, Rick Gower finally understood. He hadn't arrested a Navy SEAL. He had arrested himself. And the sentence was forever. The fall of Rick Gower was not just a victory for Tyrrell Bishop. It was a victory for the integrity of every officer who wears the badge with honor. It reminds us that while justice can be delayed by corruption and power, it cannot be defeated when the truth is backed by the full resolve of those who serve with a pure heart. Rick Gower's 58-year sentence stands as a towering warning to any who would use their authority to oppress rather than protect. The higher you climb on a ladder of lies, the harder the earth will hit you when you fall. If this story of absolute karma and the triumph of a true American hero moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see justice in action, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that define our world. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light. What part of Gower's downfall was the most satisfying to you? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Thanks for watching, and stay vigilant.